Ethiopia has been the fastest growing economy in Africa out of the non-oil producing African countries. The oil producing countries, some of them, had been growing faster up to the crisis last year. I think the main reasons for sustained growth, we have had an average of roughly 11% growth for 6 years now. The main reason I think has to do with the fact that we have focused more on agriculture, and agriculture has been growing, and agricultural growth has pulled the whole economy forward. And secondly, we have invested quite a lot in infrastructure. So by combining both, I think we have achieved a rather fast growth, and we hope to maintain that.
This was a fast-growing economy, considered among the fastest-growing economies for a decade and a half consecutively. It started to attract the attention of global capital. Ethiopia was becoming a destination for investment. The Ethiopian economy was becoming a big market. Right now, that has changed. I was looking into the IMF report, the Regional Economic Outlook, released in June. As per their forecast or their estimate in 2020 or the 2012 Ethiopian fiscal year, they estimate that the Ethiopian economy would grow only at 1.9%, very low. Next year, 2021 or 2013 Ethiopian fiscal year, 0 growth rate. The economy would stagnate. We haven't had such a performance for decades. In 2 years' time, this is where we degenerated into. Very unfortunate. So this means the economy is not going to create jobs. It's losing existing jobs. Growth was one of the critical factors behind the massive decline in poverty over the years. So this time poverty is going to increase.
Food insecurity is the other name for poverty. And we need to tackle poverty in order to make sure that as many people as possible earn enough to be able to feed themselves. And that fight against poverty, in my view, has to focus on agriculture, not only because agriculture produces the products that we need to feed people, but also because it's the mainstay of our economies. So our focus in terms of fighting poverty has been to focus more on improving agricultural productivity, on managing the variability of rainfall better, both through irrigation and water harvesting techniques, and generally economic development as a whole. Secondly, that should reduce the number of people who need assistance, but it's not going to eliminate it. Even the United States has people who are unable to feed themselves throughout the year. And that's where social security programs come in. Those who are unable to feed themselves, either because of unemployment or old age or whatever, are given assistance from domestic sources. The challenge for Africa is the assistance to those who are unable to feed themselves does not come from domestic sources. It is not budgeted. It's not an institutionalized process. So over time, as our economies improve, we should be able to have a more robust safety net program in our countries. We in Ethiopia have started a safety net program, but it's largely financed from outside. So over time, we need to take over that program, both in terms of expanding its scope and making sure that it is domestically financed. So I think the broad strategy is quite clear. We need to reduce the number of people who need assistance, and we need to provide institutionalized assistance to those who need such assistance.
I don't have to resort to very sophisticated economic analysis. show how much the economy is in trouble. In fact, it's in doldrums, as they say. I can give you a very good example. In Oromia, the protests against Abiy's regime have been running for several weeks now. And as we know, the capital Addis is at the heart of Oromia. And people in Addis are bearing the brunt of the sanctions that are being imposed by the youth movement in Oromia. So price of essential commodities, bread and butter issues in Addis are skyrocketing. So I don't have to come up with sophisticated economic analysis to show you how difficult the situation is in Addis, because every DK and Hari in the streets of Addis understands what it means to be in a situation where one has to pay twice, if not 3 times as much a price as he would have, say, 10 months ago for a kilo of this and that.
The change in regimes has been away from a command economy to a market-driven one-party system to a multi-party system. And I think in broad terms, we could say that we have carried out the necessary economic restructuring, and we are beginning to see the fruits of such restructuring. So my hope and expectation is that Ethiopia will persevere on the current course.
This is a government that has abandoned very successful, effective public policies we had that led into double-digit economic growth that resulted in massive decline in poverty. This is a government which has little commitment for development. Development is a complex task and it requires serious commitment. You need to develop policies that could deliver on development. You need to allocate budget to support your policies. You need to mobilize the public. You need to know your priorities. Unfortunately, the people in Arat Kilo are not really committed to development. Their priorities is completely different. It's not development, it's not poverty reduction, it's not industrialization of Ethiopia. So it's a matter of policy, it's a matter of leadership.
The leadership of Abiy Ahmed is not in any way interested in economic issues. To the extent that they are interested in economic issues, they are mostly interested in how much money is going to be dispersed for their loyal customers and how much money they will withdraw from people who are not particularly interested in their approach. I wouldn't say they have policies at all. This is not a leadership that is steeped in this tradition of trying to figure out what policy works better for the country. This is a leadership mostly interested in trying to figuring out how to convince enough number of people among Ethiopians to be confused or think twice about asking critical questions about why things are not working the way they expect them to.
What you can see is a renovated palace in Arat Kilo. The figures I see in the media is that they spent about 170 million USD to renovate the palace, the office. This creates no jobs. It doesn't help industrialize the economy. It doesn't help growth of the economy. It doesn't earn any foreign exchange. It's a waste of foreign exchange. This 170 million USD spent on renovating the palace and offices accounts for 6% of the total export earnings of the country last year. Huge waste of resources. This we have seen it, but like I said, this contributes nothing to poverty reduction, nothing to job creation, nothing to transformation of the economy. So it's for the public to see. The economy is in shambles.
Abiy Ahmed is mostly interested in window dressing, as they call it, window dressing, in the sense that, for example, Abiy Ahmed is mostly busy trying to renovate the Grand Palace of Addis Ababa. And the strangest thing is, as a matter of fact, the Arat Kilo Palace is surrounded by people who have probably the lowest living conditions in the country. I'm not blaming for having created this situation. I'm not blaming Abiy for having created this situation, because it has been so for quite some time now. What makes Abiy's approach is very bizarre is that he thinks the renovation of the palace is going to create some kind of relief among people who have bread and butter issues. So his economic policies, if he has any, are mostly revolve around such projects which, like I said, could only count as window dressing. Abiy has been very clever by half, I should say, trying to capitalize on projects that had been in place the last 27 years, and trying to take advantage of inauguration ceremonies and all that. Otherwise, he has hardly launched any project whatsoever, except for the window dressing projects of Arat Kilo, which, let's face it, have never achieved anything other than creating an illusion that this is a guy who's interested in beautifying everything, mostly, of course, his residence and his surroundings. Otherwise, he's not interested in changing the lives of or transforming the lives of people. He has hardly mentioned the case of peasants, which are, of course, the bulk of the Ethiopian population. He, while bragging, having created a job opportunity of the landscaping project he has in Arat Kilo, his policies or his lack of policies have resulted in the lack of job opportunities for maybe 10 times as many people who had been involved in, say, industrial park projects.
I'm not aware of any purely market-driven economy. The state has a role to play in any market economy. And I believe the state has a more robust role to play in developing economies. The fundamentalism of all types, I think, are wrong, whether it is religious fundamentalism or market fundamentalism. All extremes, I think, are wrong. A more balanced, a more pragmatic approach to economic change and development, in my view, is more fruitful.
So while he is busy working on window dressing projects such as the Arat Kilo project, thousands of people are losing their jobs in Adama or Hawassa or Mekelle industrial parks, which I would have thought would have served as an opportunity or a source of job opportunity for thousands of people. So the state of the economy is in shambles, obviously. For one thing, because it's not being handled by people who have a clear understanding of what's happening. Second, it is being handled by a prime minister whose idea of growth or development has nothing to do with what it means to ensure growth or development. Someone who is more interested in window dressing than actual development endeavors.
There has been very little infrastructure investment in most of Africa for the past 30 years. There was infrastructure investment in the initial period of colonization, and it's very interesting that you are refurbishing the railway system that was built by the Brits before the Prime Minister was born. And then in the initial years of independence. Since 1980s, the gap in infrastructure investment has gone in the wrong direction. Why? Because since the 1980s, the policy has been the private sector does the infrastructure. Now, why do we need infrastructure? What's the point? We need infrastructure primarily because that's an essential input for manufacturing, for exploiting our natural resources, for agriculture, and so on and so forth. Now, in manufacturing, public sector doesn't have much of a say. In agriculture, the public sector does not have much of a say. In mining, same thing. So enabling the private sector through public investment in infrastructure is not something that Africa is going to discover. If it tries to, it will simply be reinventing the wheel. That's what happened everywhere else. Second point I want to make. When I say much of infrastructure investment in Africa, not all, but much, will have to be public, that doesn't exclude, for example, in the case of a railway, implementation of the project will probably be done by some multinational company. The wagons and locomotives will naturally be manufactured by somebody else, another private sector. The management of the railway system itself might be done by a private company. But the ownership and the risk capital of that railway system, if it comes from the private sector, it will have a number of risks. First, all of you are saying the public sector has to de-risk. In other words, you are saying the public sector shoulders the risks and the private sector reaps the benefits. That's not going to work. Second, your discount rate is understandably high. You want to have a profit rate of what? 20%? The average profit rate in Africa that people expect is about 30%. With a discount rate of 30%, imagine how much infrastructure we will be able to do and how much of the gap we are going to fill. So the idea should not be that the public sector should be out, private sector should be in. We have to do, each one of us have to do what our comparative advantage seems to suggest. Now, the public sector does not have money. And that is limiting investment in infrastructure. But you know, these whiz kids in the financial system, I'm sure they can create instruments. The Prime Minister created one instrument. It's called the IFF. The idea was that he would commit to pay a certain amount of money for, say, 30 years for development aid. And the banks would use that as collateral and give us the money now. Simple idea. Financial engineering. Same type of financial engineering can be made. GM has a big multinational financial institution. This talk about deleveraging and all the rest, there's trillions of dollars of money that does not know what to do. And because it does not know what to do, it's going from one commodity to another commodity and becoming a wrecking ball. Today it's oil, tomorrow it's wheat, the day after tomorrow it's some other paper. We want this capital here to do something tangible. And there's a risk here. And the risk, Don's institution is AAA rated. Mine is junk. So if Don could raise the money and lend it to me, then I'll have the money to invest. And the private sector can come in implementation, can come in manufacturing, and so on and so forth. Now, two issues you raised, telecommunications and finance. We have not liberalized the financial sector in the sense that we have not allowed foreign banks to operate in Ethiopia. Why? Because these giants, Chiam, manage an economy that's many times bigger than mine. These giants can wreck a giant economy such as that of the United Kingdom. Ours is a flimsy boat. They come in, They use instruments that we cannot control, that in most instances we don't even understand. The best of us don't even understand. How are we going to regulate it? How are we going to regulate these people? It's not possible. We don't have the capacity now. So what did we do? We allow the private sector in Ethiopia, which is not infinitely more complex than the public sector, and therefore could easily be monitored and regulated by the public sector. We allow the private banks to operate here. So we have more than 10 private banks here, but not foreign banks. Is this going to be the permanent feature? No. As we grow, as we develop, and as we become more sophisticated in our regulatory capacity, of course we'll liberalize, but not now. And we have lost nothing because of this policy. Telecommunications. Ethiopia, as a country, I think in per capita terms, is investing more in infrastructure than perhaps any other country in Africa, whether it's railways or power or telecommunication. We're doing it by borrowing from banks that are not that good at speculation, mostly Chinese banks. So we have the money, borrowing it, and we want telecommunication in every school, in every village, and we want it cheap, not at 30% discount rate, at 2%, 3% discount rate. That is why we have not yet opened up the telecommunication sector to private investment. Is that going to be the permanent future? No. Once the market failure there is overcome, we move out. There were times when we owned breweries in this country. Now we are privatizing all of our breweries because that's not our business. The private sector can do an excellent job. We used to own, and we still own some textiles. The only textile factories we own are the ones that we could not privatize because they're not making profit. But we want to privatize this. So it's not, our policy is not designed to keep the private sector at bay. We know that's a dead end. Without the private sector, there is no development. What our policy is based on is make sure that the public sector plays its role so that we will have Asia-type growth. What do I mean by Asia-type growth? Fast, but not just fast, equitable. Both fast and equitable growth. You cannot have fast and equitable growth without a clear division of labor and partnership between the private sector and the public sector.
The private sector knows this very well. We know how the private sector is suffering. They couldn't access foreign exchange. They couldn't access credit. They couldn't get the necessary security, the necessary protection for their property, for their investment. So it's not for me, but for the public, for the private sector, ordinary citizens to see. The cost of living is increasing, inflation. We have runaway inflation, it's over 20%. And the government is doing nothing. I mean, what we see is these lavish gatherings, lavish parties, instead of really attending to the needs of the people, the ordinary citizens who are suffering as a result of this very high price increases.
I'll repeat what I said earlier on. Why do we need infrastructure? It's for economic growth and transformation. Infrastructure that does not serve that purpose is meaningless. Now, let me repeat again, I'm not saying the private sector has no role in telecommunications. Owning a cellular phone franchise in Africa is like owning the mint. So why wouldn't the private sector engage there? I have no problem with that. It's possible. I'm not saying that the private sector should not be engaged in any infrastructure activities. I'm saying the infrastructure activities that matter for manufacturing is electricity. Roads, railways, ports. Without manufacturing, you do not transform our economy. So you can have all the best telecommunication in the world. If you can't manufacture a proper shirt to export, you can talk all you want on the phone, you will not transform your economy. So the key is agriculture and the key is manufacturing. On the issues that matter for manufacturing, for example, electricity, while the Nigerians have done a spectacular work on telecommunications, they have not done an equally spectacular job on power, electricity. And even if the private sector were to engage in generation of electricity, and it does, what will be the cost? They have to have their discount rate is steep. They have to have their profits. And who is going to pay for that? It's the manufacturing factory. So which one do I want to support more? The private sector that generates electricity or the private sector that uses electricity? For me, supporting the private sector that uses electricity is more important for transformation than allowing the private sector to generate electricity. And my good friends, Chairman Don, have said that we are impatient. Yes, we are impatient. We are impatient because we are in a deep hole. And every minute in that deep hole hurts. And not psychologically, physically, people die. People die of hunger. So we need to move fast. Now, with regards to the factors that have helped Africa move, governments have changed, there have been elections, policies, macro policies, and so on and so forth. That is all true, but to be honest, that's old stuff. It was done in the 80s and 90s. So there's nothing new here. We are maintaining the same thing. We still have our conflicts. We still have our problems in governance. We have moved more aggressively to come up with a common African agenda and to engage the international community with one voice, and that has been a very important factor. And there is this big change globally. The tremendous growth in Asia has been the biggest savior of Africa. And we shouldn't ignore that. Now, if we don't take care, we'll be taken for a ride and dropped when the time comes. If we don't use this window of opportunity to transform our economies, then we'll be lost. And we have to learn from the experience of others. Most of the successful Asian countries, most of the infrastructure investment was not done by the private sector. It was done by the public sector. So let us not dichotomize. Let us, each one of us, do what we are best able to do.
Ethiopia had built a reputation for having a strong fiscal system, fiscal discipline. We have a very clear system on how budgets are apportioned, how budgets are allocated, how federal grants are allocated to the regions, and then the management of the finances. The public financial management system was strong, very clear, transparent, so much so that even donors, they directly support government programs. Donors, they use government finance system. We call it a country system. They use Ethiopia's public financial management system to administer their finances. So we had a very good reputation. A lot of these systems are being undermined. Budget system is being manipulated by individuals. You would see officials from Arat Kilo and elsewhere coming out and allocating budgets, talking about how much budget they will allocate to do that, to do this. You don't do that. This is unlawful. But this is what we are hearing, and they say they have given this project to this region. They are going to build this. They are going. You don't do that. There is a system on how you allocate your budget. Budget is being used to buy political support. This was very strange in Ethiopia. Money is being given to people who are then bought to give political support. A significant amount of government budget is spent and it's not accounted for. This is unlawful. Lavish gatherings, lavish parties, using public money, public resources. This is the kind of government we have now in 4 Kilo.